Welcome to the Friends of Dan Music Podcast. I'm Dan Miles. You've been listening to the music of Kenwood Anderson. It was called Strollin'. Can be found on his Handful of Grooves EP that he released back in 2013. As I'm sure most of you know, on our last episode, Nate Morton stopped by to talk about his recent collaboration with Kenwood, Funky Jazzy Stuff. Joining us on the Skype from Los Angeles to continue the conversation and also undoubtedly take us into some new uncharted territory as well is Kenwood Anderson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be on.
Well, before we get to the music, I have a very important question I need to ask you first.
Uh-oh.
Back in the 90s when you and Nate were both taking classes at Berkeley, was he the smooth happening guy he is now, or was he a huge nerd?
He was the perfect balance of those two. He had the same energy, just the really positive energy, really fun, upbeat person, and nerdy in a fun way that I latched onto because I'm the same way. I'm certainly nerdy. So, I used to stalk him a little bit. Like he would be in his practice room practicing, and I would just hang out, outside and just listen and watch. He's one of the many of the guys that I would just check out, and he just always had just a ton of energy, and even the way he plays is like his personality as well. I just love his huge energy.
Let's hear about your path that led you to Berkeley and beyond, Kenwood Anderson, the early years. Because on the last episode, we learned that you're a multi-instrumentalist, you're a composer, you're a producer, and nobody just arrives that way fully formed. So where does your musical journey begin?
Well, I was born and raised in Rochester, New York, and my parents were teachers and educators, and they played music a little bit too. I think everybody did back then. This was I was born in 1968, so even back then, a lot of people had a piano in their living room, so we started. My brother and I took piano lessons because a lot of kids took piano lessons back then, and at some point, I decided I wanted to play the drums. I don't remember what made me decide that, but I just kind of had this craving for it. And so I was taking piano lessons first and then drum lessons when I was really young. And I just kept with it. And then I kept playing drums more. And at some point decided I'm a drummer, and I was specializing in that, and I would practice all the time and take lessons and study really hard. But I was always playing piano in the background, and when I got into high school, I was messing around with writing songs a little bit. And so for my whole life, I've always said I'm a drummer, but I was always playing piano a little bit and writing on the side. And I was always listening to music constantly on the radio and buying records and listening to them. And I would look at the liner notes, there's a nerd thing right there. Mm-hmm. Looking at the liner notes, memorizing the names of the musicians, the engineers, the producers, everybody. So I was always fully immersed in the musical experience beyond just playing drums.
Well, I got to ask you, you say Rochester. Lou Gramm, he's your hometown hero, right?
Yeah. Lou Gramm, Steve Gadd, Chuck Mangione, there's Roy McCurdy is another legendary drummer from back there. And, and just there was a huge, a lot of the famous jazz artists in the 50s and 60s came through Rochester and played gigs there. There was and they're finding out more about that stuff now via the internet and stuff. But there was Rochester, New York was a good hub for jazz back in the day.
As you know, I'll show you on camera here. I have the compact discs of both the albums we're talking about today. And there's a couple reasons that I do. One, I like to support the artist. Two, I like to catch the liner notes like we talked about. Hey, I'll own a little bit of nerdery over here. But also, I do feel I think physical product is going to make a comeback and not go away again, because I think this whole thing about the convenience of downloads where you can, have that instant gratification. Oh yeah, I want that song, and just have it instantly. And not only is it sort of really detrimental to artists to have their work just passed around that way. Once somebody's got it, they can just share it with everybody. But I think it's just more fun. Not only is there, I mean, there's more information on a compact disc. You actually get a better sound from the disc.
Yes.
And, if your hard drive crashes, you just take it and you can upload it. Anyway, I don't need to sell it on the case, but, I like having the quote unquote artifact, as my friend Tom calls it. And I think that people are going to come back around to, I want to own The Sting with Robert Redford and Paul Newman. I just wanted to have it as a little file on my computer, but I don't know. We'll see. But speaking of one of these discs I just held up, Handful of Grooves, we didn't talk about that when Nate was here because it wasn't his thing. It was your thing. And we're going to be talking a lot about titles today. And I have a theory about that title, Handful of Grooves. I mean, I can tell you the theory, or you can tell me why you called it that.
Well, that was my first album, and originally I was planning to have 10 tracks. And I got all the tracks to where they were almost done. They weren't mixed yet, but they were written and all the parts were kind of recorded. And I listened to all the tracks in the order I was going to put them on the album. And 5 of the songs I really liked, and the other 5 just were not cutting it. They were just kind of boring, and one of the songs sounded too much like one of the other ones. And thank goodness I'm humble enough to say that, even though I wrote this song, that doesn't make it good, and, throw it away if it's not good enough, or leave it for something else. And I was wondering, what can I do? And then my friend Jordan told me, just make it an EP. Just take those 5 songs you really like, put that out as an EP, and that's that. And so, okay, perfect. And then at some point I thought, there's 5 fingers on a hand. There's 5 songs, Handful of Grooves. Okay, there it is. So I don't know how I come up with stuff like that.
Man, I wish I would have told you my theory before you explained it, because that was my exact theory. I'll read it off my little outline. It says 5 tracks on the album, 5 fingers on a hand, handful of grooves. So I was right, but now no one will ever believe it because you told it first.
You could edit it and put yours before mine or something like it. We'll fix it in post.
I'll fix it in post. My listeners know I'm honest about stuff like that. But that's cool. I mean, honestly, I think EPs are a good idea because, again, flashing back to what we just talked about, our generation, we have an expectation that an album is 40, 45 minutes. It's 10, 11, 12 tracks. And we used to have an expectation that there was such a thing as side 1 and side 2, and whether it was in a vinyl album or a cassette tape. And my kids don't really have that sense at all. They know what an iPod is. They don't really know about vinyl albums and stuff. So I tell people all the time when I know friends of mine that have been working for a year or two on an quote unquote album, I go, why don't you just put out a CD single? I mean, just stick something out there. People, sometimes you put the 5 tracks or the 10 tracks or the 12 tracks and they only buy 1 or 2 of them anyways.
Right.
Now me personally, I like the fact that funky jazzy stuff is, 13 tracks and full of great stuff and everything. But I understand Handful of Grooves too. And, prices reflect that. You don't pay as much for a 5 or 6 track EP. And that's actually a good thing too, because someone might come along and not want a full album. And that's another one of the problems with downloads, though. You can cherry pick and people don't have the sense, and you can shuffle the sequencing and everything. But anyways, well, as I said, we're going to talk about titles because I know you listened to the interview with Nate, and half the time I'd ask him about a title and he was deferring to you anyways. So we'll get to that. But first, let's get to the titles on Handful of Grooves, because, the first track on the album is called Nicole, which also happens to be Nate's wife's name. So why do I find that wildly inappropriate?
I know it's quite inappropriate, but I hope that Nate knows that I didn't write the song about his wife. I really didn't know her back then when I wrote the song. So yeah, Nicole is a woman I dated years ago out here in LA, and we just had a great relationship and we got along great, and she understood me and put up with all of my nonsense, so that just made her even better. It was just a great relationship, and unfortunately it ended when she moved to Spain because she got a job in Spain, and it was her dream job, her career, the kind of thing that she always wanted, and she had to take it. So, we went our separate ways, but I always, when I started making this album, when I decided, okay, I'm going to make an album, and I started just messing around with a B flat minor chord, and it kind of fell into this kind of groove that is in the song, and the more that I put the song together, this sounds like Nicole, or this reminds me of her for some reason. And so there it is. There's the title, and that's kind of her song, her theme.
And well, then the next title is Before You Go, and you mentioned she went to Spain. Is that still her? Before You Go to Spain, or is that just a coincidence?
It could be, or it could be, sometimes when relationships are breaking up, or when I'm getting dumped, especially, I'll have that little moment of melancholy. It's like, wait, you don't have to go yet, and so that song is, and I've always liked a lot of songs with that kind of theme. What's that song called? Let's Just Kiss and Say Goodbye by the
Manhattans?
Manhattans, yeah. That's one of my favorite songs. And there's a lot of like ballads like that with that kind of theme that I always like. So there's my version, although it's instrumental.
So, every time you go away.
That's another one. I love that song.
Then after Before You Go is the track Strollin', which is the one we opened the show with. We heard a bit of that. Midnight Rain is the one after that. And then the track I want to showcase from the album is Keep On Keepin' On.
Yeah, thank you. That's another sort of happy accident. Like I somehow, I think I came up with the bass line first, and this sounds pretty cool. And the guitarist who played with me on this album, his name is Shin Kawasaki, and I love him to death. He's a fantastic guitar player, great singer, and he gigs all around LA and does a lot of stuff. And he, when I sent him this track, I didn't tell him, what to do. I just sent him the track, and here's the chords, and you play whatever. And he doubled the bass line, and you can hear, and it was so perfect. It just added this little flavor to it that I just really loved. And Shin is a kind of guy like that. He always brings a little magic to everything that you do.
On CD Baby, you characterize this EP as smooth jazz that won't put you to sleep.
Yeah, that was a little marketing thing that I was doing at the time when the album was out, trying to, catch people's eye and say, wait, what was that? Because I tried to do, smooth jazz, and some people have smooth jazz that is very soothing, and they like to go to sleep to it or massage or whatever. But I was trying to do music that was smooth but had a little energy to it that would keep you awake and want to keep listening.
I understand just what you mean, and I think the listeners do too, because there was a period of time where there was a seemingly endless succession of saxophone players, putting out this groove music. Clearly, it was written and performed by talented players, but even so, it still had a somewhat bland quality to it. It just sounded like it was intentional background music. And it's like, okay, well, here comes the funky bass, here comes the funky beat, here comes the sax. I've heard this before. And I think a lot of it had to do with just a radio genre, like smooth jazz. They had a new genre. They go, well, people want to tune into this station. And I kind of remember when that appeared. In fact, in the early 90s, I had an ex-girlfriend. You're not the only dumpy here. But I had an ex-girlfriend. She was big into this channel in Sacramento. That was the type of music. And then I had like a coworker's wife, also in the early 90s. She liked that kind of station too. And from my point of view, I'm more like you're talking about. All right, well, I've heard one, I've heard two, I've heard three. I feel like I've heard everything the station is ever going to play now. I felt like calling them saying, look, enough with the saxophone players. I mean, can we get like a guitar-oriented smooth jazz thing? Can we get, I don't know, a flute one? Can we get keyboards like you do? But it just seemed like it was always, it was like the sax was standing in for the human voice. It was like, the sort of style of it. And I guess there's no real point on beating up on a style that's kind of come and gone, but because you had mentioned quote unquote smooth jazz, I think that means different things to different people. Frankly, to a lot of people, it probably just means Kenny G. And love Kenny G or hate him or whatever people feel like. I don't feel like most of what I considered smooth jazz, well, I would certainly maybe put him in that category. A lot of this other stuff wasn't even really as interesting as him, because he's a virtuoso on his instrument anyways. This was just kind of, so all I'm trying to say is in my long roundabout rambly way is that when you made that little marketing plug, smooth jazz that won't put you to sleep, I know what you meant. There are the little touches like you meant with your boy Kawasaki,
Yeah, and I noticed because I also wanted people who normally don't listen to smooth jazz to check this out, and that actually did work. I had a lot of people that said, yeah, I usually don't listen to smooth jazz, but I really like this, or that really, and it still happens. It keep people there. It's amazing. People are literally buying a track or two, like every day I check my sales and people are finding it and buying it. So, and I'm just glad that I can just reach people that just say, just check this out, forget about the genre, just check it out. And like you said, there's a lot of saxophone in smooth jazz, and I have a couple of friends who are great saxophone players. And we've collaborated on stuff occasionally, but I decided not to feature saxophone in my smooth jazz albums just because there's so much of it out there, and I wanted to do, something a little different. I mean, I'm a keyboard guy, so I figured I'd do that. So my stuff is always going to be keyboards, guitar, bass, drums, that kind of thing.
Well, I applaud that decision.
Thanks. I'm hoping not hoping, I will get another smooth jazz album out later this year. And I'm also working on an R&B album with a great vocalist as well. So, I'm always going to keep doing another album and another one and another one. So more to come.
You know where to come and promote them.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, I think it's time to listen to something. So let's go ahead and listen to that track I mentioned. It's the closing track on the Handful of Grooves EP. Here's a Kenwood original called Keep On, Keepin' On. Well, that's a sweet jam. But now let's transition over to funky, jazzy stuff. The first time Nate was here, we spotlighted his Playground Philosophy album, which, as you know, he released under the pseudonym Duty Bug. And he mentioned that you told him you wanted him to have a release out there with his own name on it. So was that the driving force behind the project or just one factor?
It was a driving force because I remember Nate I gave Nate a copy of Handful of Grooves and he really liked it. And then we were talking one day and he said, we should do a project together. And that's where this started. And at some point he talked to me about, what kind of music should we do? Just getting some basic ideas. And he mentioned the Playground Philosophy album and he was happy with that. And then he wanted to do something with his own name on it and something that was, different than Playground Philosophy, but still had, his vibe in there. So that was a thing from the beginning. It was definitely, I think even for a while, I was just thinking it's just Nate Morton's name on the cover of the album. But as we worked along, I think it was Nate who said maybe we should put both of our names on the album because this is turning out to be a real collaboration. So we're really happy with that. And even though, I wrote most of the tunes, this music would not have existed without Nate because, talking with him and hanging out with him, I got a lot of his energy and vibe and sense of humor. And all of that stuff goes into my writing process and recording parts. And, and I would just do a demo and then send it to him. And he would tell me what he thought and he would ask for changes and I would make them. And so it was a lot of back and forth and a lot of collaboration, a lot of creative energy going all through the project. So, there were so many, I couldn't even remember like specific things, but on every song, there was a lot of discussion, like little emails back and forth and texts and stuff like that. It got crazy for a while because we would text, hey, how about, okay, at the end, take the end out and then put the 8 bars from the bridge, put that here and try that. What do you think about that? We would just send ideas back and forth so rapidly and and so you can't like pinpoint exactly when we changed this or exactly when we added the title here or whatever. It was fun and crazy and it was great. It was fun.
Yeah, you actually sounded just like him there for a minute. the phrasing and the way he talks is funny. But I think I can see why it would start out just called Nate, and I can see why it would end up being both your guys' names. It makes sense because you did achieve the goal of if somebody goes and searches his name, they will find the album. So
yeah.
Where they won't with Playground Philosophy. And then also, if I got the album and it was just called Nate Morton, Funky Jazzy Stuff, and I started to read about it, I go, well, wait a minute. Like who's this Kenwood Anderson guy who's all over it? And there again, if you just called it Kenwood Anderson album featuring Nate or something, that's not, it does seem like, I understand that it's 50-50 in the sense you mean in terms of a 50-50 collaboration. Maybe Nate didn't write this chord change or everything, but he was an inspiration for it. And he clearly played his ass off on it. I mean, I can't see how anybody who plays the drums would be disappointed by what they hear on this album. But we'll listen to some more music in a minute. But as I said earlier, I kept asking Nate, what about this title? What about that title? And he's like, ask Kenwood. So that's what we're going to do. We played 5 tracks when Nate was here. So we'll talk about those 5 titles first. So Rhinoceros Foxtrot. I mean, come on, man. How do you put those words together?
I am crazy. I'm nutty. I have nutty, silly thoughts. I have some talent for writing as well, which I get from my dad. And my whole life I've been a huge fan of movies as well and TV shows and stuff. And I've always just been kind of conscious of titles and words. I love playing around with words sometimes. And when I would write tunes, because I even started writing songs back in high school, there were like 6 different girls in high school I was in love with all at the same time. And I would go to the music room and try to write songs about them and dedicate it to them. And some of the songs just had the girl's name and other songs had, a description, or something, or so I was always thinking about titles, what title goes with it. And it's hard to describe, but just when I'm writing a song, recording it, putting it together, at some point the song is coming together and the song sort of tells me what the title might be. And I did at one point on my computer, I just wrote down a whole bunch of titles and phrases, like anything silly that I could think of, 2 words I could put together that sounded crazy, silly. And so I did that a lot on this album. I had just a huge paragraph of words that I would, put together. And at some point along the way, I took this phrase and attached it to track number 7, and this phrase goes to track number 1. And, it's something in my crazy brain that's like, it thinks of this stuff. And also I want, there's so much, Nate and I had so much fun making the album, and Nate it cracks me up a lot. And I wanted, some of his silliness, I want that to be you can hear it in the music, and why not put it on the titles as well? Why not make people think, what the heck is this? And so it's really just to be funny and silly and crazy.
Well, I appreciate that explanation. And you don't strike me as a guy who probably is into drugs, but Rhinoceros Foxtrot seems like the kind of thing, like somebody just come down off with some kind of, I'm not a drug guy either, but it's just like somebody come down off of crazy, oh man, I just had this vision of a rhinoceros dancing. Was it the waltz? Was it the twist? Was it this? It was a foxtrot. I mean, it's just.
It could be. I mean, I've been known to take a drink or two, so that's my drug of choice. But yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think like that particular tune, because most of like the melody is kind of in the bass and kind of in the lower instruments.
True.
And it sounds like a rhinoceros, out for a jog or something. And at some point I thought of, is he jogging? Is he walking? Is he dancing? And then I started thinking of old names of dances, and the twist and the spin and the foxtrot. And Nate picked up on it because that little drum intro that he plays, it's almost like a Gene Krupa kind of intro. He was thinking foxtrot, when he played that little, and he never told me. We were just in the studio and, okay, take one. And he started playing in the intro. And there it is.
Okay, so Foxtrot was from the drums and Rhino was from the low keyboard notes. Well, that kind of makes sense. And now I'll listen to it with that in mind. But, I mean, it even gets bigger because a sauntering brontosaurus now. So he's not dancing, he's sauntering, but he's even bigger than a rhino. And this one made its way into Nicole's artwork. So, I mean.
Yes. Yeah, I just, my brain is strange sometimes. So I think it was, I pulled that title from my list of titles and phrases that I came up with. But again, something about the bass line, and it sounds like a big lumbering animal to me. And saunter is a word that describes a particular kind of walk. And so, there's my crazy brain again. So there it is. And I was totally surprised when Nicole, Nate's wife, designed the artwork. And that was another happy accident too, because I was trying to design the artwork at home on my computer. I got Photoshop and I'm putting all these fancy colors and fonts together and trying to make it look all, serious. This is amazing music. And then Nate, he just, he told me, Nicole had an idea. Let her try, something. She's got an idea for the artwork. Okay, great. And then when it was done, he sent it to me in a text, and I looked at it and I just started laughing. And I said, "That's just perfect." And she put the dinosaur in there, and it was perfect.
Yeah. Number one, it's whimsical. Number two, it relates to one of the tracks that has a connection. And number three, it's like it connects to Nate. It's his wife, mother of his kids. And then, also because the music is definitely sophisticated. And the artwork really isn't. It's like it's. I don't want to say it looks like it was done by a child because it doesn't, but it looks sort of more childlike. The illustration. It's whimsically done, so that's pretty cool. But there again, there's a track that's just simply called Cinnamon Raisin. I mean, was that inspired by somebody's bagel?
I am a huge fan of cinnamon raisin bagels, and there's a place here in LA called Noah's Bagels that I'm just crazy about, hopelessly addicted to them. I'll just put that out there. But for the long time, that song didn't have a title. I think it just had 2619 or so. It had like, sometimes when I'm coming up with songs, I'll just title it with the date that I created it. So it could be, 2/11/17, February 11th, 2017 or whatever. But I think that song it had like 2691 or something. That was the title for a long time. And actually, that tune I was going to put on my next smooth jazz album, but at some point I just thought, oh, I think I'll send it to Nate and see what he thinks. And he really liked it. So I said, okay, it's going on this album. And at some point, I don't know. I don't understand why I used the term cinnamon raisin for this title. It's just me, and there's something wrong with me. So
No, I'm just saying that this just shows that there's just like there's variety musically. It wasn't like every single title had a rhino or a dino in it, Although you guys could have called the album Rhinos and Dinos now that I think about it. But and also, if anybody didn't hear our last show, I mean, you can hear these tracks performed, and of course you can buy the album too. But so let's see, there's a couple more of them. A Day Off. I definitely wanted to bring that one up when Nate was here because you mentioned, how busy he gets and a day. I mean, the voice, man, it seems like it's constantly on the air 52 weeks a year. I mean, it's probably not, but where most people would do a season and come back the next year, like they do 2 full seasons per year. So I got to believe it's on the air more weeks than it's off. And, that voice band is like beyond seasoned. I mean,
yes. Yeah, they're just an incredible band and incredible chemistry together, and they work super, super hard on that show. Not only playing for the live shows, but they record the songs for iTunes, and it's like they're making an album every day or 2 albums a day or something. Like the amount of work that they put in is huge, and they're amazing. They make it sound so easy. Yeah. So knowing Nate is so busy all the time, A Day Off, because that song it has a happy sound, it has a relaxing sound, and it sounds to me like I got a day off today. I can, I could just chill, and I just thought of that. I was totally thinking of Nate saying, I know when he does get a day off, he gets that feeling of just, this is so nice and relaxing. And so Nate was the inspiration for that one.
Yeah, and that one seems less drug oriented. Yeah, I would go with that. And so Cinnamon Raisin is like, oh yeah, Kenwood's hungry. Day Off is like, yeah, poor Nate. And then Rhinoceros Foxtrot. I think that the titles are coming from the music itself, so I get it now. But then again, we only have one other one that we played last time, which was Night Highway.
That song was originally called 5/21/11 because that's the date that I came up with that idea, and at that point it was just a little groove thing. It was just a chord and a little bass line thing. And it's there's another thing about my crazy mind. When I come up with ideas for songs, I mean, I've been creating music since 2008 or 9, somewhere around there, and I would always come up with little ideas, little grooves, melodies, bass lines, little things, and so I would just record them. And, I wouldn't have time to finish the song, so I would just record a little bit, record 2 bars or record 8 bars here. So I have like all these subfolders in my computer, in my music folder, different projects, and even like, my smooth jazz folder I'm looking at it now, that's why I'm clicking all these buttons here. I have 346 songs, finished songs or unfinished ideas, just in one folder in my computer. And then I have a folder for Nate Morton in my music computer, and that one has 111 more ideas of just like unfinished stuff and ideas for future projects. So it's really crazy. I keep getting ideas for stuff, and then sometimes I'll go back, like I was mentioning earlier, where I'm writing songs and you're going back and listening to them. It's okay, I like these, and then these 2, no, they're not cutting it. And I had that problem with this album. There were a few tracks that just weren't exciting enough or weren't interesting enough. And so I decided to go back into one of my old folders. Let me find an old groove from something and see if I can find something that works. And that tune popped out. I remember just opening the folder, and it's 5/21/11. And I just opened that folder and I looked at and I played the groove, and I was like, oh, yeah, I remember this. Let me try. And then I just started working on it. And next thing you know, it's on the album. And so Night Highway, the title is kind of like, it sounds like driving home late at night on the freeway, the top down or the window open. And that's another Nate thing too, because he works late nights and he's driving home late at night. And I do too. And I always like that feeling, especially coming home from a gig or something like that. Night highway, it could be, driving home at 1 a.m. and the breeze is blowing and you're feeling good.